Anish, Reuben, how are you guys? Welcome again. We'll repeat guests. Yeah, when it's two people, it's always hard to coordinate who says hi or what. But you've both been on the podcast before, so I don't think I need to run the introductions for too long. So if you want, just I'm going to try and get you guys to do a quick intro of yourselves and what it is that you do. So I'll just start with Reuben, and then we'll get going.
Sure. My name is Reuben. I am the project steward of Firo, formerly known as Zcoin, and basically we're a privacy-focused cryptocurrency with our own unique privacy protocol. So, yep, that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, last time we had you here, you had just rebranded to Firo, and you were just introducing a lot of new concepts and ideas. So it's going to be good to hear how that has developed. And well, Anish, your turn.
Oh, my name is Anish Mohammed. I'm the founder and CTO and sometimes the chief scientist for Panther Protocol. Panther Protocol provides privacy for DeFi. That's it.
Cool. So, and yeah, as well, like Anish has also been a guest on this podcast. And last time we spoke a lot about his background and about the whole concept of what Panther is. So if at some point you want to get a deeper idea on what any of these two projects are, I'd really recommend you guys to check out the full episodes individually with both of them. And yeah, well, I mean, you bought the podcasting, so we can just get talking about whatever. Last time, as I said, Firo had just rebranded. Last time Reuben was here. Last time Anish was here. We were they had just basically set out to launch Panther, and now you guys are collaborating together. So would any of you, I mean, I'm just going to point to Anish here, would you like to touch on what the collaboration is?
So there's a bunch of overlaps in multiple ways. One is a philosophical sense in the fact that we both value privacy. And the other part is the fact that some of the mechanisms that we use are kind of similar, cryptographic primitives, in some sense speaking, not identical in that sense. I should warn people in that sense. Like mechanisms for providing privacy are in the same class. And there are possibilities where what we both do could actually coexist and we can actually work together. So that is kind of how we think about it. Reuben, I think you're in a far better position to articulate this better than me.
No, well, I mean, I guess actually in the space, although, there's a lot of privacy coins, there's a lot of, projects that do privacy, not a lot of them actually do have, I would say, cryptographers or research teams, right? And I think, there's kind of been a lack of collaboration in the space. Everyone's kind of like, just kind of doing their own thing, kind of siloed off. Mm-hmm. And, although, yes, we're both like privacy projects, I do think as a whole, in general, if we do work together, collaborate, is generally, the results you're going to get is greater than the sum of its parts, right? Mm-hmm. And, Panther has, definitely the cryptographic resource and researchers to do it. And we also have our own independent research team. So I think it's a great way to, at least, make sure that, we have open communication channels, we can, discuss ideas of what we have. And I think, we also looking to become a supported ZK asset in the Panther Protocol ecosystem as well. So I think that's basically sums up what we'll be working on in this partnership. Yeah. And Oliver and Anish, I've known them for quite a while now as well. Yeah.
I just wanted to expand on this point because for some people, including myself, hearing this, most of these projects do not have cryptographers. I mean, I would think that using email, that should be number one thing that you should have for this. Why isn't it so?
Well, if I may say,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Reuben, you go first.
No, you first, please. You're the cryptographer here.
No, I think the challenge is the following, right? there are only a very small subset of people who you could call cryptographers in one sense or the other. Like academic cryptographers, what that implies is they gone to some math department and they do a PhD in some topic in cryptography. And typically the career for them is either do a postdoc and go to a research lab or become an academic, right? Mm-hmm. Both of those things are not a massively something that actually gives you a lot of compensation. And secondly, people who are interested in doing that are not really motivated that easily by compensation. So now you have a challenge, right? Mm. And the other thing is the time it takes for somebody to go through this process to get to where you want to is quite long. And given all these things, the total amount of, and there's one important thing that everybody should recognize. Security and cryptography is a key skill for national security. So a lot of the employers of this kind of people are, have contracts that won't allow them to do anything else, right? And they have a strict security requirements like that. So in total, what has actually happened is like the number of people who have the skill, firstly, they're an isolated community. They don't really go out and talk to everybody. And secondly, the people who are interested in blockchain had created a bit of a challenge for themselves by kind of, being a bit not very friendly to cryptographers. Cryptographers have been exposed to a lot of the problems in blockchain for a very long while. And from both sides, cryptographers didn't really highly think of blockchain. Until recently, ISCR and other cryptographic conferences didn't have a segment of blockchain until very recently, even though it has been there for like last 10 years, right? So there is both sides of the problem. Like one side of the problem is the blockchain people not really recognizing the need for real cryptographic expertise. And cryptographers looking at this thing, this is one of the things that's happening. And both of them combined with a very small, tiny population, we have hundreds of thousands of blockchain projects. And definitely there are not that many cryptographers. So that explains the mathematical reasoning behind what has happened.
Okay. And would you like to add to that, Reuben?
Yeah, people think that cryptographers are dime a dozen, but, even within cryptographers, not all of them are, it's kind of like the doctor, right? You're not going to get your neurosurgeon to perform like, a leg surgery and stuff like that, right? So cryptographers, yes, they probably can understand, but they also tend to have specialties as well. And in a way, also a lot, because of the way blockchain technology moves, it's also quite tough for someone who's just casually involved or cursorily observing the space to actually keep track with all the developments. Like, the work in ZKP, in the past, 5 years or so has been maybe, normally would have maybe taken 10, 20 years. And now it's just like compressed and everything like that. So I do think it is hard, and it's also hard for a team to kind of say like, look, I'm going to invest in cryptographers, but I don't actually have, it's kind of like research work, right? We don't really know where we're going to go at the end of the day. And it's kind of like, am I going to get a return on investment? That's a big risk to take as well, especially when everyone else is just like, let's just use what's out there. Let's deploy fast. Let's get it a working product. And that seems to kind of have been a trend in blockchain right now. Let's get something out that, maybe not so decentralized, maybe not so great, but it works. So let's just get it out there. And, that obviously puts research on kind of like a second seat. And that's kind of where we differ in approach for Firo. So yeah, that's kind of it.
So I should probably say at this point, I was lucky enough to have been in a PhD program and an applied math program. So I have worked in a couple of labs, so I know a bunch of the people. So I could probably plead with them to come work with me. So that was the advantage we had. So I convinced my PhD office mate to join the team. And similarly, having worked with a whole bunch of people in the ZKP space, I have the ability to, plead to them saying, please help me out. And this is the reason why you should help us out. That's the only benefit of actually having spent 20 years in cryptography.
And Anish, I mean, from your face and from the gestures you were making, I'm sure you wanted to add something about CKPs and the development over the last years, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. What Reuben said is incredibly to the point. Like, 2011, okay, I had the handle of zero knowledge for the last 20 years, okay? And I know this sounds silly to a lot of people. I had Gmail, I have GitHub, I have Telegram, pretty much all of this.
I can attest.
Since 2001, I've been interested in zero knowledge. But zero knowledge really took off after the non-interactive schemes were created in 2011. But the 2011 scheme wasn't really much. 2013 is when the paper was kind of written, and then things started moving. And I think one of the things that happened was, at that point in time, the total number of people that were interested in non-interactive zero knowledge in the non-academic sense was like close to zero. And suddenly a team arrived, created the Zcash one, and then a whole bunch of other people got interested. By like 2016, things have moved on. Fry, Stark and Fry and all those things came up in 2016, 2017. And literally from then on, like that was a competition in many ways, right? It's like one side, Stark and that schemes are all happening. At the same time, Bulletproof happened. The snarks in the middle are happening, and then merging between all these things. And literally 2019, Eli Van Sassen actually wrote a blog post called the Cambridge Explosion of ZK snarks or something like that, which literally summarizes what has literally happened. What Reuben said is absolutely right. Typically, cryptographic research would have taken 20 years, at least 10 years, probably happened in the last 3 years without a shadow of a doubt.
All right. I mean, there's quite some points to take this here. I was just, we were talking with Reuben the other day when we were just like gossiping, waiting for you to join the Zoom call about things that are not what they seem to be. That are not what they seem to be, because like there are blockchain bridges that are actually multi-sig wallets. There's the whole Bitcoin in El Salvador thing that are just things that are not exactly what they're advertised as. And I reckon that this must happen a lot in the privacy space, right? There must be a lot of things that are just get called privacy when they're nowhere near it.
I mean, it's a very, very hard thing to do, right? Privacy, in the fullest sense of speaking, is almost impossible to do. It's an information theoretic arbitrage with very tight bounds. And that is an incredibly hard thing to do. Among my other spare time interests, I have an interest in philosophy. And I wrote a paper, which is the basis of Panther, like 10 years ago. I call it The New Secret. And my co-author now became a very well-known philosopher. It was a joint work with him. So to me, there's a real philosophical basis to how you actually do things like this. And you need to actually meet a minimal criteria. But unfortunately, the effort required to meet the minimal criteria is high, that most people, kind of fake it. So, the return on investment very much depends, right? Like, if you put in a lot of effort and you get this much, and that this much is not having much of a value in the market, then you go, you know what? Anyways, let me just call it that way. And nobody is going to figure out that, I am doing X or Y or Z. That's how I am wrong.
Mm-hmm. Reuben, want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, there's obviously a information kind of like differential, right? I mean, obviously we don't expect, the retail average Joes to kind of understand all this cryptography or even, bother to dive into the intricacies of this. And especially, blockchain and stuff like that, it moves really quick. And what actually tends to happen is, especially in the unregulated space, a lot of people make all the sorts of claims, and it's more about ideology rather than a technology. And that's kind of unfortunate because everyone gets ideology. Everyone can get behind ideology. And it's not to say ideology is wrong, but it has to actually be backed by actual technology. But it is often easy to just focus and talk about the ideology, get people to buy in when they actually, the technology barely kind of meets the requirements of that ideology. So I mean, I do think that, the awareness is getting better, but, I don't think this is a problem that's unique to blockchain. I mean, we've seen, stuff with misinformation campaigns in real life and on complex topics like vaccines, which I probably should not go into, but, it's just a general trend in the world where complex topics have been bound into like simple ideological messages rather than the actual science behind it. So yeah, hopefully people wake up. I'm not that hopeful, but it needs to be balanced, right? Yeah.
But actually, the point you were making there, that's very good, because you're right. Like, there is a tendency to like put down like nuanced discussions. I was just hearing the other day, the chess player Garry Kasparov talking about how he, and this is like an old podcast or something, but he was talking about how if people actually wanted to take down Trump, they should focus on one thing instead of like trying to point out all of his faults, because as soon as you would point out more than one, but that's his theory anyways, right? And so take it for what it's worth, but like that's what he was saying, that if you focus on only one, you actually get a better chance, because the minute you're too widespread to attack many different fronts, that becomes a problem, because then it's easy to get ideology in the middle. So, and since you're making a pretty nuanced point there, where do you think ideology starts getting in the way of technology, especially in such an idealistic space?
Well, for me, I think, maximalism, when ideology becomes maximalism, and the inability to kind of see past what you have already, I think that's when ideology really gets, into the weeds. Of course, this is a very controversial opinion, but, I do think that, Bitcoin kind of suffers from that, right? Like, the unwillingness to consider other stuff, and, the crap on other projects that are trying newer stuff. And of course, not all Bitcoiners like this, but I'm talking in particular like the maxis and stuff like that. To say that, pure proof of work's the only way to go. What happens when the emission goes to zero will be totally, subsidized by fees and stuff like that. No one actually really knows. And the kind of like just, burrow your head into this ideology. There'll be only 21 million. There'll be no other stuff. We'll have small blocks, everything, that's kind of like one example of how ideology can really get into the weeds of actually like pushing development, right? Because some people even say that the ossification of Bitcoin is a good thing, right? Maybe it is, but I know that sounds kind of sad as well. I think Anish wants to say something there. Yeah,
actually, it was really funny that he used the raise hand function of Zoom, because I was just making a joke about raising his hand because we cannot see him. But
yeah. So the thing I wanted to say was, I generally mention this to everybody when I talk about blockchain. I say to everybody, blockchain is a religion. And what, Reuben, you describe is literally, historically, that has been something that we've seen, the fight between the religion and belief systems, right? As in, like, even science, it's like religion and science has had this ongoing struggle between them on a continuous basis. And whenever, somebody has very strong beliefs, and that strong beliefs actually overcome their rationale, then it becomes tricky. So the way I think about most blockchains, they have a belief system, they have an apostle, they have a prophet and a bunch of apostles. Sometimes the prophet is a hidden one, like in Isna Sharia and Islam, which is like the Shia Islam, there's a hidden imam. So that's in 12 Shia Islam, right? The same way in Bitcoin, we have a Satoshi who is the hidden imam, right? And then there are the representatives of the imams on earth, right? Like literally the apostles in that sense. And literally these are the people who actually drive the narrative. And then, if you think about Ethereum, they actually have the prophet, or the prophets, or the apostles. He can actually call interoperably any one of them. And the reason for that is this is delayed gratification, right? The delayed gratification is required because A, for anybody to actually invest, B, for anybody to actually learn the language to develop anything in this ecosystem. And once they got into this ecosystem, there's a social cost, there's an economic cost, there's a cost in multiple dimensions. And so they really want to believe in what they do. And that completely changes the rationale and the narrative around any such scientific systems. Apologies for a long rant.
Man, and they say like the difference between a religion and a cult is like in a cult the leader is alive, right? So in this regard, Ethereum would be more like a cult.
I am not going to comment on that.
You shouldn't quote me on that either.
That being said, I do think Vitalik is one of the people that they do try to make nuanced discussions. I really like his what he writes, and he doesn't seem to be like falling into like this maximalism thing. Of course, people can impute what he does and stuff like that, but I think generally he is. He tries to be as objective and open to things as possible. So, in terms of cult leaders or stuff like that, I think he's one of the better ones, definitely.
And I'd like to see how I'd like to hear how do you perceive yourself as a cult leader, Reuben?
No, I am a very bad cult leader. I mean, it has been said that, to lead a project, you need to be charismatic and stuff like that. And sometimes that's a problem, right? Because, I even, purposely chose the title of a project steward, right? Instead of something like CEO or something like that, right? And it's the way I see myself is like looking after the project, because eventually, I think Satoshi had the right idea, right? Eventually the project cannot, once it's already taken off, it cannot be always like beholden to this like one cult figure. And I think one of the issues is also because most of the stuff that I say as a lawyer is very nuanced. It's not like a simple punchy message. Mm-hmm. That definitely hurts. But I try not to be one, but I try to be honest and transparent about what we do, and hopefully people can see the good intentions and the good work that we're putting in.
Go ahead. Sorry. No, I was about to say we are far away from actually having any cultish following, and I don't think a Panther would literally have the kind of a cultish following in any way, shape, or form. Firstly, we don't actually have any such cult beliefs as such. The only belief that we probably have is that privacy is valuable, and different levels of privacy, meets different requirements, and society might have an upside in having privacy. So this is how we think about it. But, who knows? That might become a religion. If that becomes a religion, probably that's a reasonably better one, I guess. But I don't want to be the apostle or the prophet in the religion or the cult leader.
I would say that privacy is becoming a little bit of a religion, especially because you're seeing so many beliefs cluster around the privacy community. And this is not the privacy community or privacy as a concept's fault, right? But people do tend to conflate being pro-privacy with also being like libertarian, anti-vaccination, at least in COVID, etc. Like people like to put all these things in the same bag, whether it makes sense that they belong together in it or not. And that's probably like a discussion, like Reuben said, we shouldn't get into. But
that being said, I would like to say that like privacy often has been always seen as a challenge to authority, and a lot of the people that do have this type of belief systems obviously don't trust governments, they don't trust large organizations, and they're right to a certain extent, right? Of course, you can there are spectrums on how to do that, right? But anyway, I actually just wanted to share a little funny story on terms of cult. Not that Firo is turning into a cult, but the other day, several community members wanted to have a T-shirt with me on it, and that was like a bit of a warning sign. I was like, I'm not gonna put official merch of me. That would be a kind of weird, right? But yeah, I just thought that was kind of funny because everyone was like, "Yeah, let's print it." I'm like, "No, please don't."
Well, last time I talked to you, I'm going to call you out publicly. Last time I talked to you, you had a mug that someone made that had an image of you as well.
That was kind of cool, yeah.
I like that one. No, but I mean, devolving from the cult thing a bit. I mean, I just keep laughing about the mug thing because I remember seeing it and I was like, "Oh, this is pretty cultish." And now we're back at the discussion. When you talk about collaborating between both of your projects, you're right that not everyone collaborates in this space, which is a shame because there's a lot of valuable insights that, like, paradoxically end up not able to communicate with each other, which you would call centralization. Well, there was a bit of a paradox there. Why do you think the privacy space isn't communicating with itself more, since that's the one I would say gets closer to being more of a traditional science? If you want to start, Anish.
Could you repeat your question once more for me so I fully understand it clearly? Yeah,
I mean, I would think that cryptography, because it very strongly correlates to privacy, and it's the one that's more of hard science, right? As opposed to what we would study in blockchains, which is a bit of components of economics and game theory, which are like more like social sciences. But cryptography is like, I would say, more objective. So why do you think there's not more research and sharing going within that community?
Oh, I would say very strongly that there are a lot of sharing that's going on in the privacy community in the cryptography world. But that is different from the privacy community in the blockchain world, right? So I've published at least one paper of mine in a PET, privacy enhancing technology workshops and things like that. So like there's a whole bunch of research that goes on that's mostly academic, like very, very academic. And you work with different people, you publish stuff, you get the kudos, and paper is done, and you're done and dusted. The blockchain space, that's kind of different, right? There is a bunch of upside to be had, mostly economic upside. And that is probably the reason the incentives are not really aligned. If, your incentive is to have a nice paper at a good conference and, have a beer after that, you don't want to be like, fighting against anybody for that thing, right? The incentive to fight is very small. But if there's a few million on the table and you actually get a chunk of the few million, if you manage to message yourself to be the person who actually came up with that, yes, there is a lot of incentive for people not to collaborate, but to, how could I say, fight against each other. So that's kind of the game theoretic argument about that. So, I don't know, maybe I'm being a bit of a cynic.
No, I actually think this is a great kind of idea to kind of illustrate, like, the different approaches that different projects take, right? Especially in the privacy space. And on the one hand, you have the Monero, everything's as open as they can be. They are generally quite collaborative as well, right? And all your research is open, stuff like that. On the other hand, you have Zcash, right? Which did start quite open, but recently has become more and more opaque. And just to kind of like give an example, right? They have this Orchard upgrade, which is their kind of implementation of Halo 2 that's coming, I don't know, in a couple of months or so, right? There's no kind of paper out for Halo 2. There's no, the documentation for Halo 2 and Orchard is, yes, it's a protocol spec and everything, but it doesn't give it's just like, it describes stuff, but doesn't describe it fully, right? And the way that they have chosen, and they also like created this new license to kind of say that, we can do stuff that we don't have to open source, but we only have to open source after a year and stuff like that. So you can see that it's a clear movement because they have put in a lot of work, a good amount of research, and a lot of hard work to kind of develop Halo 2 and all their tech, right? And obviously, if they do all the hard work, then later all these other projects just come in and copy it. There's this worry that, oh yeah, we are putting in the hard work, but we are not necessarily reaping the benefit because everyone else can copy us as well, right? I mean, I don't kind of agree with that because I do think that generally the main project that comes up with the tech generally still, succeeds. But, they have taken this path to say like, look, we're going to be more close, we're going to be more opaque to kind of protect and be able to monetize our IP. And that's why we aren't as open as we can be, because obviously if in the cryptography set, it's not just academic in the blockchain, because now you are competing with other projects that are also trying to one up you. Say, my privacy stuff is better, my stuff is better. So obviously, if you have like this, technological breakthrough, you want to be first to market, right? So that definitely hurts a collaboration in a very big way. Yeah.
Yeah, I was about to say, I agree with Reuben. And, the way I would describe it is like the arbitrage of innovation in privacy research, the era for that has started. So that's what Reuben is kind of alluding to in this Halo 2 episode, right? So, Halo 2 and Halo Infinite papers were published, and people looked at it, and then they started working on it. Probably, the amount of effort they have put in, and they're seeing competitors that are following them very closely. So, typically what you recognize in the snarky space, as in like the ZK snark space, is there are so many schemes that's been created, but some of the schemes are better than others for various implementation reasons. And, it then boils down to just how fast can you implement something? Can you actually make something better? There's been a bunch of tooling that's been built by some set of people. And again, your ability to compete on the tooling is kind of bounded. So what can you actually do? So it's just, I think it becomes like a question of like, do everything that you can in the space that you're allowed to, which essentially means marketing, right? So that's kind of where I think one of the problems exists. Like going back to the first thing that Reuben was saying, the total number of cryptographers in all the ZKP projects in total will be, small compared to the same amount of money if it were something else. Let's put it that way.
And you both touch on competition in the space, and I guess you both already sort of dove a little bit into this issue, but it would be good to just go back to it, because then there's the sense of, you would say that if privacy could be considered quote unquote objective, if there is something as a good result that can be achieved and someone someone does a breakthrough into that, then it doesn't make sense to have as much competition in the privacy space, right? Because you're all pushing towards the same goal. So what do you think the value of having multiple players in this ecosystem is, Reuben?
Well, the thing is that, especially in the blockchain privacy scene, right? I mean, there hasn't actually been kind of like what we call like the holy grail of stuff, right? And privacy is also a cat and mouse game, right? And similarly, like, if let's just talk about like medication, right? Like, antibiotics, right? You have this bacteria or, some sort of stuff, and you have one type of antibiotic that kind of fixes that. What happens when the antibiotic doesn't work anymore, right? So I do think that, especially having multiple approaches to privacy with different primitives, with different constructions, does make the space better, right? Because who knows, right? Maybe our stuff is totally broken. Maybe, there's an issue in Halo 2 or ZK snarks. Then what? If everyone's just going through a few type of systems, And I mean, like even now, like if you see so many people are looking at like Monero and stuff like that, and there's already kind of, you know, there are signs that Monero's privacy as it is right now may not be sufficient in the next 1 or 2 years, because, you know, talking about statistical analysis, the way they pick their decoys, of course that gets a bit technical. But the idea is that if we just like kind of blinker ourselves, say this is the only approach that we're going to go right now, at least we have ZK stocks, we have ZK stocks, we have, ring signatures, we have Lelanter Spark, and at least several different types of approaches to privacy. So if one fails, and we can always learn from each other, right? Mm-hmm. And I do think that makes a more strong privacy ecosystem, right? I mean, there's some projects that say, all right, yeah, I don't really care. I'm okay with using Intel SGX technology, proprietary stuff. Let's just rely everything on Intel to provide privacy and all of that. Yeah, we may not agree, but that's also another path to take, right? And each kind of approach also has different trade-offs, right? Some has good performance at the cost of trusted setup or fancy exotic math. I do think there is real benefit to have diversity in privacy technology rather than just 1 or 2 big ones, and then everyone's just like, oh yeah, that's the way to go. And when one of it breaks, that's kind of like GG, right?
Yeah. So adding to what Reuben has to say, having published at least one paper in the TPM space, I have some first-hand exposure to trusted execution environments and writing protocols with trusted execution environments. There is, two models of trust that's actually being proposed here. The model of trust that is being proposed in TPM is you actually have to trust the hardware manufacturer, and you also have to trust that if they are malicious, there is no way for you to actually validate that. And also, if it breaks, there is no way that you could actually fix it either. So you have that bigger problem. And then the other side of the equation is like, do we just use one scheme? Again, okay, say tomorrow one of the nation state adversaries have an access to a quantum computer, and that implies both ECDLP, elliptical discrete law problem, and our self-factoring becomes a linear. It becomes in polynomial time, which essentially means you can solve in a really fast time. That implies a lot of the schemes that we are currently using will be toast in no time. So probably the only things that will be standing will be like stocks and some other variants of, snarks that are the SMARGs and that such. So I don't know, like there is always value in actually having heterogeneity. This has been proven to us by virus outbreaks when Microsoft and Windows was the main thing. Now it's much less of a main thing. There is other people, even at least at the edges. But there is also the cost. Standardization comes with benefits of economies of scale, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at the electricity or things of that sort, what is like you really don't have to really go for every plug in every country in that sense. There's a large amount of standardization. So you can plug your device into the socket on the wall. You're kind of assured either it's 110 or 220 volts and some cycles in AC, and that gives you a lot of benefit. So I think there is absolutely a lot of benefit in standardization in interoperable sense. Okay, so even if we actually have one of the breaks, we still can actually start thinking in and out in that sense. At the same time, doing everything the same way also has the same problem. It's like if one of the things breaks, like everything, completely breaks in that sense.
And interoperability is a whole thing, and Panther is very much about that whole thing. But both of you touched on the fact that the blockchain cryptography space and the blockchain privacy space are not necessarily all that there is to the privacy space, right? That there is much more being developed that isn't directly being developed for or because of blockchains. So I figure like you, Anish, would be very good to explain what's happening in the privacy and cryptography space that isn't related to blockchains, but that could also be of interest.
Sure. I mean, the things that I should probably start off with fully homomorphic encryption, FHEs, right? There has been significant progress in fully homomorphic encryption. And you might wonder why it's interesting. So the reason why it's interesting is like if you go to Google, if you ever had actually searched for a flight in Google to say Bali or someplace, and then you go to your Gmail and the ad that you have is like cheap flights to that place, right? That implies Google has actually access to any search that you make on Google. Imagine a situation where you have the ability to search something on Google and Google doesn't know what you search for. That is what a fully homomorphic encryption would allow you to do. And it has a whole bunch of other privacy and other implications. You can actually have machine learning algorithms work without revealing data, right? And this, in a larger scheme of things, like there's this close relationship between secure multi-party compute and fully homomorphic encryption. Those two are like, some of the very, very, very interesting schemes that are there. Then there are some, attribute-based encryption and some of the cryptographic primitives that have come into being. And then there's also differential privacy. Differential privacy has been around for a while now. I mean, when I say while, it's like more than decades kind of thing. Cynthia Dock, who's in Microsoft Research, she actually published a monograph. It's very much worth a read. Essentially, what that means is you look at a privacy set in that sense, and you perturb it, and you use statistical tests and see that it is almost impossible for anybody to recognize as something has been changed in that sense. So all of that is very interesting from a more machine learning perspective, in that sense, if I'm to put it that way. So, doing machine learning while preserving privacy, to me, that has a broader and larger implication to society than probably blockchain would have in the immediate future.
Mm-hmm. Reuben, want to add to that?
No, I have nothing to add to that. I mean, I think Anish is definitely more of the subject matter expert on this than me. I mean, I do agree stuff like, FHE and stuff like that, definitely, interesting. And yes, blockchain technologies, cryptocurrency is pretty groundbreaking, but a lot of really cool cryptography is like really coming to the fore, especially, in the digital world. And in a kind of a environment where right now in the digital world where we have kind of surrendered our privacy and like, oh yeah, what can we do? I do think like new schemes are coming out. Like even though this is not like groundbreaking tech, I do think that, the fact that end-to-end encryption in messaging now is pretty considered standard, that's only been happening in the past few years. I mean, that's not like super groundbreaking tech, but to do so, and I guess in the scalable manner was previously challenging, and I guess for some projects still are. I do think that we're heading in the right direction, but I just don't know whether we're moving kind of fast enough. Especially, I think, when we're looking at stuff like CBDCs and, or like the Australian government, like, saying that we might want to hack, our own citizens or insert backdoors into cryptography. Those kind of stuff really, I don't know. It's like going back to the Stone Ages of cryptography, like back to the Clipper chip days, which I guess I think Anish knows as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to literally mention that, like, people seem to clearly not understand from history, right? Like if you make a mistake and you try continue and do this, I mean, I don't know who defined this. Like if you do something and you expect a different result, it kind of defines craziness in that sense. And that's the craziness that we are actually seeing. You do something silly and you've already known that the result is going to be utterly disastrous and you expect a better result. I don't know what to think of them, what to make of them, or what to say to them.
And I mean, would you consider that, as Reuben said, we're moving in the right direction, but maybe not fast enough?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would completely agree. So the way I think about this, maybe I'm a cynic and my view of the world is slightly jaded. So I've been involved with the bullshit called the cloud really early on. So, in fact, I ended up writing some bits of it. So to me, I saw the writing on the wall, the big data becoming a huge thing. And like, even I was involved in some other bits of that space. So I see the pace at which, privacy is being eroded because as an economic argument has become an incredibly big one. So if anybody has actually read the Unusual Effectiveness of Data paper, there's only three things that are there. One is humans to actually build the models. 2 is hardware, 3 is the data moat. That's literally what it is. And the real scourge for data for the FANG of the world is ongoing, right? It's an onslaught. And what's literally happening is like the onslaught of the FANG is not only just FANG, and other people are joining that onslaught. Everybody is actually joining them. And everybody is seeking information arbitrage on the average user. And, I'm hoping that the privacy world will have some solutions to some of these problems sooner than later, because once the cat is out of the bag, the only way it's going to normalize is by half-life. So data normally has a half-life. So it has to decay back to normality. And otherwise, the data that's already in the vaults of Google and Facebook and Twitter is with them and not with you. So they have an arbitrage over you. Now, you meaning every user on the whole face of Earth, right? So that, to me, the more data they collect, the weaker the position of the society is. And, the more arbitrage they will run against the society.
I guess
do think that
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I do think that a lot of it, actually, the tech is there, but there's just not the will to implement it. The will or the economic incentives to implement it. I guess like Signal, is a bit of an outlier. Where people want privacy, and therefore like they kind of made a business model. Then they launched another privacy coin and stuff like that. But I do think that like for example, stuff like like with what's happening with the Apple iPhones, or like you can easily do end-to-end encryption for iCloud, right? I mean, they definitely have the resources to do it, but because of pressure, they've decided not to do so. Instead, they've decided to have this new cryptographic system, or a new system that scans your phone for potential CSAM pictures and upload them. And that, to me, it's a bit off topic, but it's something that really gets my goat, because they have the ability to change like privacy, but they don't. They choose to go the other way and use like silly arguments that don't really actually protect the people they say they're protecting. But actually just enable mass surveillance, and that really irks me. Like that really pisses me off. Yeah,
man. And I think that point is gonna be like, this is a topic that doesn't come up as often as it should, that there are resources to give privacy to people. It's not like we're in the obscure days where like people were just inventing the business models for the internet, and we're just learning how to exploit data. Now they have data that they're actively like, there are these Facebook leaks about all the stuff that they know that is actually harmful for their users, and you could draw a parallel with privacy to that. About how much they know that what they're doing is actively bad for their users, but because there's not actual pressure happening to them, or because no one's really able to get them to do anything, they just like that they don't have any reason to move forward. And that's, like you said, hardware developers, that software developers, that the people that are building the networks that we use. I have like 10 more minutes with you guys at most before Anish has to go. So I just want to get both of your impressions on CBDCs, because I reckon that's a very relevant topic to the crypto community right now. And I'd really like to see how you both think we should approach it.
Is it okay if I go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm going to say some things that a lot of people might not like, but it's what it is, right? So if CBDCs are going to happen, I kind of divide the world into two halves. One where people care about privacy, the other people don't care about privacy. And that could be, one could be considered the authoritarian world, and the other world. The world is not Boolean. It's not black or white. It's shades of gray, if I may put it that way. So literally what has happened. Yes. So, somewhere in the middle is this problem. The problem here is the following. Like, if you actually have a privacy-less CBDC, what you're offering, if you're a nation state, head of a nation state, what you should recognize is your adversary actually has a very good window into everything that's actually happening as an economic activity in your state, your adversary could pretty much, sack the whole economic and intelligence unit straight up, right? So that should actually inform some of the leaders of the world that what they should be thinking. The other part is there is some benefits in actually doing this. So if you were to get 10 economists in the room, you will get 20 opinions on something, right? Mm-hmm. And your ability to do an A/B testing is kind of very limited. If you ever see, increase in rates in, say, the US Treasury, and you wait for 6 months to see, or 3 months to see how the economy responds, right? But in the CBDC, what you can do is you can actually have changes, and you have very, very good feelers, and you get like instant feedback. And you could also run virtual experiments in many ways. So in many ways, you would actually push the practical aspects of validating economic models to the next level and run experiments in the nation state. At the same time, exposes the risk of privacy-less situation to the largest possible extent, allowing authoritarian states to do things that we never ever thought could happen. That's what I was talking.
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely, the potential gains are great, right? It's a double-edged sword. It's almost like if you have a CBDC, it's almost as if the bankers and the economists have this SimCity look over like how money is being spent, how money is being flowed, and stuff like that. And obviously there's all this argument that this is good to prevent money laundering and crime and stuff like that. But to me, the thing is that, maybe it is possible to have a kind of like a happy medium between privacy and transparency. I don't know. I'm not an expert in this thing, but I know stuff like FHE and stuff where you do have like individual privacy, but you still can get aggregated data. Maybe that's one way to approach it. But I have a feeling that the thing is that designing and implementing such systems aren't easy, right? And it's still kind of like in its infancy, and there's no real kind of like huge impetus to do so. And I mean, especially in Asia, like even where I come from, everyone's like saying, let's go cashless, let's go, like the whole convenience of not holding paper notes and stuff like that has been really appealing, right? And I do worry that, I think it's not just like the government looking at what you do, but the ability to cut you off from the system at almost like basically a click of a button. That to me is scary, right? Because, in the US, we talk about the right to bear arms, the right to rise against your government if they're authoritarian. Guess what? You cut you off from your money, cut all this stuff. What the heck are you going to do, right? I do think it's interesting to see that even like certain advanced economies, where, of course, for different reasons, like for example, Japan, despite being one of the most digitalized places, they still rely a lot on physical cash as well, because they have negative interest rates and all this sort of stuff. Therefore, they want to keep cash. I mean, a CBDC, you can probably sort of like automatically say, yep, negative interest rates, right? Oh, I'm going to cut a bit of this. You can apply that because, it's almost like a currency that you can control, right? And similarly, you have like Germany, right, which I guess has more, relevant arguments where, especially, them going through a dictatorship and stuff like that. They see money as like cash as kind of like a separation of the state and the citizen, right? Where the money is not totally controlled by the state. And I think it's an interesting balance of power there. Yes, obviously, there has to be some control over like, limits and stuff like that. But, when you see the world banning cash, going through digital thing, and there's very little talk about privacy, is usually in the terms of, yes, it's private, but then we can see it. The government can see it. The authorities can see. And that's a real thing, because we should not be trusting our governments with our stuff. I mean, there was even leaks from, potentially the US census data, right? That was out. Not just like stuff like Facebook, but actual governments. I mean, our government leaked all our national identities, our addresses and all of that. So an adversary could also do that too. So I do think that CBDCs, to me, the cons of enabling authoritarian governments kind of far outweigh the potential benefits it can, because I think if there's one thing that we can learn from humans is that power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts completely. And that has been the case. No matter how well-intentioned you start off with, there needs to be balance in power to keep that power in check. Yeah.
And also in like a big enough sample. I mean, if you have 15 presidents, there might be a chance that all of them are well adjusted. But if you have 120, then you might have a couple weirdos out there. And then there's where you don't want them handling this kind of data that easily, right?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, guys, I'm being very, very mindful of Anish's request to finish on time. So if you want, let's start wrapping up. Before we do so, Anish, any final thoughts on this topic or on anything else?
Oh, no, I think the way I describe it is like we are in a time and in a place where there's a lot of changes happening in society driven by technology. It has been driven by the drop in price of doing machine learning, which actually made the surveillance economy real. So the other side of the equation is this emergence of decentralized mechanisms of trust, which didn't exist under recently. And there is a third argument, which is like, for me, the more interesting of all of them is like non-interactive zero-knowledge proof systems, which to me was like, until recently, there is no way in hell you could have authenticity without privacy. So we are at a melting pot in the time, in that sense of technological evolution. Maybe we could make the right kind of choices. And FHE is another thing that happened. Until 2008, nobody really believed that you could actually do it. So, obfuscation wasn't there. It has been impossible to resolve, right? So we are where we are, where it is possible for humanity to actually come up with solutions where we can have fairness, we can actually have society where we respect each other and have democracy and things of that sort. And also we need to remember, we are at the precipice of other challenges, the existential risk that we have, existential risk of AI, existential risk of climate change, existential risk of, I don't know what the hell, right? So we have a bunch of choices. Each of the choices is going to drive society towards a stage where other choices are, lost. And I would like us to actually think really hard before we step down the road of a non-invertible changes in that sense. And, and we should have a representative thinking. Right? And one of my worries is like, as probably this is an example of a very rare occurrence of a non-representative conversation where a brown-skinned man and an Asian person and a Hispanic is talking about things where the future of state is a question. Typically speaking, that's only a very specific gender, is very specific, demographic is being represented. And I think, people really need to get a chance to actually say what they want because their future is at stake.
Okay, interesting, man. I have to say, back to the CBDC thing, that both of your perspectives have been the most balanced that I've heard so far. And considering that I had two people that are advising boards on CBDCs on this podcast before, that really worries me. But I'm happy to know that at least someone is putting out like a voice of reason out there when it comes to this whole hot mess.
My shirt says everything. Citizens, not suspects.
And right now I'm very much a suspect because I just got an AML letter from like a centralized exchange. So please, please get cracking on that decentralized exchange. Please, Anish. And well, yeah. No, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, thank you both very much for this opportunity. I have to, run away now because my connection here is like at the mercy of so many things. And like, at any time I might lose it. And then, we tried so many times now, 3 times or 4 times. Every time I'm stuck in some place with no connection. So this took a lot of planning of mine to make this happen. So while it's as good as it is, I want to say thank you to both of you. And, hopefully when I get to my next place, wherever in the world it is, I probably have better bandwidth and, better chance to talk to you about.
No, thank you for making the time on your world tour, Anish. And I have to say that the sound quality did improve a lot with the camera off. And now it's still okay, but it was not ideal at first. Reuben, also thanks to you, man. Like you've also been making a lot of time in your schedule to make this happen. And this conversation really flew by, guys. Really welcome back anytime. And thanks a lot. And thanks to everyone listening.